Mary Louise Cook for the Big Sky, joined by Big Sky Commissioner Tom Wistrcill and Montana State Athletic Director and the Chair of the Big Sky Basketball Committee, Leon Costello, who will be providing some insight on Big Sky basketball tiebreakers and championships. So Leon, we'll start off with you. As the Chair of the Basketball Committee, what are some of the things that your committee does?
Well, since we focus on basketball, we really take a deep dive into any issues or new rules surrounding the game of basketball, and we look at it from a men's basketball and a women's basketball perspective to see how can we utilize the information that we have or any new rules to really best position Big Sky Conference basketball for success. And our job really is to make recommendations to the athletic directors and then have what we recommend go through our governance process within the Big Sky. But really, it allows us to focus on basketball and take a deep dive on that to really position ourselves to have success within the conference. And as we look down the road to qualify for postseason opportunities, obviously work on seeding in the NCAA tournament. And then the ultimate goal is to get multiple teams in the NCAA tournament.
Now, your committee has put a lot of hard work into reevaluating tiebreakers. You talked about seeding. How is this different, due to COVID this year?
We can't look at it in the same way as we would in a normal year. We know that teams are going to play an uneven number of games. And really what we tried to get to is what is a threshold that we feel that most teams are going to be able to play as far as number of games played. And when we looked at it, we thought, taking into consideration that the magic number from the NCAA was going to be kind of that 13 number, we felt if our teams could play 10 games, then when you use kind of the win percentage as a factor for determining the seeding, we felt pretty comfortable with that. And so when we looked at the tiebreaker, we really wanted a majority of our teams to be able to hit that threshold. And so right now it sits if a majority of our teams, which would be 6, can play 10 games, then whoever meets that threshold would then be, seeded accordingly. And then those that don't would be kind of considered in another tier. But we also said this might just be a really crazy year, and we, maybe one team can hit 10, or maybe all of us can hit 10. But we really thought in order to have as fair as we possibly could way to look at tiebreakers, a majority of our teams had to hit that certain benchmark. And so we've stair-stepped this down. So we start at 10 and we go backwards a game until we can get a majority of the conference to play that threshold number of games. And then we will seed it accordingly. And we felt in an unfair season, that was the fairest way to do it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your insight on that. So Tom, a question for you. Leon did allude to this, but can you explain how seeding based on winning percentage this season is different from in seasons past?
Yeah, typically in a year we would, just finish the 16 or 20 games and just seed the teams top to bottom with some, fairly easy tiebreakers. And, as Leon said, we don't know what we're going to face here over the next few months. I think maximum flexibility is kind of the term that seems to permeate around our decisions. And so Leon and the basketball committee looked at a number of different scenarios. And as he said, settled on this number of 10 games because we just don't know. We have to find a way to separate the team that might go 8-0 in the league versus a team that goes, 16-1. Those are the scenarios that we talked about because we just don't know what we're heading into. And, I think, through the various people we talked to, we kind of settled on that 10 number. We also looked around the country and saw what other conferences were doing to do some benchmarking. But, as Leon said, we're going to take this graduated scale. And right now I think, it's safe to say it's written in pencil, firm pencil, and we'll address it as we go along. But we feel good about where we're at right now. I think the good thing is we've started to play basketball. So we have some data, we have some information. We've even started to play some conference games, which is great. And hopefully every school can get to that threshold. That will eliminate some of those potential, bad scenarios that could happen. But nonetheless, as Leon said, we'll separate those two groups at the 10-game threshold and then seed them in two different blocks. And hopefully there's nothing there that causes too much consternation amongst the conference.
So in a year that's been so unconventional, how has scheduling looked different this year?
Well, this group actually was kind of formed when we looked at the number of teams that we had in the Big Sky, and we weren't playing a complete 20-game schedule, and we weren't playing everybody twice. We kind of looked around the room. It's like, why aren't we doing this? And when we had that conversation, then a kind of a pseudo basketball committee was formed, and later on, we really formalized the process, kind of under Tom's leadership. But really, right now, as far as scheduling goes, we went from the 20 games to 16 early on to really help us with our budget, because we knew we all were going to have some issues when it comes to the virus and our budgets across the board. So we are trying to alleviate some of the stress on our budgets, and so we decided to reduce the number of games. But again, as we got more information from the NCAA on what a season was going to look like, and then we got some information from our coaches on how hard scheduling was, especially out of conference, we decided to take another look at it, and we went back to 20 to try and maximize the number of games that we're going to play. And we felt playing as many conference games as we could was to our benefit, because we were going to be all living by the same rules when it comes to testing and our protocols and procedures to get games in. And so we felt having as many or the maximum number of Big Sky games was going to be our benefit to try and get those number of games in.
Now, Tom, again, this is something that was alluded to, but I'd love to hear you go a little bit more in depth on this. Who outside of the basketball committee was involved in the decision-making process, and what was the reason for that?
Yeah, as Leon said, the committee structure wasn't quite as specific as it is now. And certainly when COVID hit, we realized we needed to have direct involvement from our best administrators to help lead us through this. And so that's why we end up with a football committee, a basketball committee, and an Olympic sports committee to handle all of these changes. And at different times, each committee has had to do various amounts of work. We certainly took a lot of input from our coaches. We had multiple Zoom calls, sometimes with just the men's coaches and the women's coaches, and sometimes we brought the groups together to really get their feedback on things. And they provided valuable information to us. Ultimately, the administrators are the decision makers. The basketball committee, led by Leon, really dug in and kind of A, B, C, D, went through the process to then present to our athletic directors, here's where we're leaning. And the nice thing is at that point, then you have pretty good buy-in amongst lots of people in the conference by the time you get to that level. And so everybody asked good questions and pressed in on things. And then I think we were able to come to a pretty good consensus. But certainly then it goes to the conference council, which includes the faculty reps, and then ultimately to our presidents. Because the changes we're making are code changes, those had to be approved by our president. So that's when our athletic directors need to talk to their presidents about, here's why we're doing this. This is why it's good for the conference right now. And oh, by the way, it might change in 2 weeks, but we hope not. And let's try to find a way, as Leon said, in the fairest way possible to come up with a scenario.
Now, we'll end on this last question, Tom. Looking forward to the Big Sky Basketball Championship, how is planning for Big Sky and Boise coming along?
We're excited to have the tournament. We're full speed ahead, working with our partners there. Unfortunately, I can't tell Leon or any of our administrators or parents or fans how many people are going to get to watch the games, because it's just too early. And we don't want to press for an answer too early because we know what that answer is. So we want to let things kind of run its course. But we are full speed ahead with a full tournament in Boise. We really feel like the rug got taken out from under us last year, and we are really excited about finishing the regular season on a strong note and heading to Boise. So, Leon, how about your thoughts?
Yeah, I think having that goal of Boise as kind of the end goal really gives our team something to shoot for. And I think it's after all the protocols and all the things, information we've been feeding all of our student athletes across the entire conference, and all the changes that they've had to go throughout this entire year, really the last 9 months, for them to have a goal in sight of, look, there's going to be a conference championship. It's going to be in Boise again, and it's going to enable us to play for a spot in the NCAA tournament, I think really focuses our student athletes to really get through the season. Let's do what we need to do. Let's buckle down. and let's get through the conference season and let's get to that point. And we've all talked about the mental health side of what this virus has done. And I think having those things to strive for and to try and reach really help our student athletes focus, not just on their sport, but it helps them get through their day. It helps them focus academically. It helps them focus out when they're not in practice and not in classes, because they have to do the right things in order to be in a spot to compete.
Absolutely. And I love that mental peace part that you mentioned there too, Leon. That's great. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for your insight and for all of your hard work to make Big Sky basketball happen.